Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf lamed. This is the daf for Shmini Atzeret in Chutz La'aretz, Shmini Atzeret in Simchat Torah in Israel. Simchat Torah is turned into a complicated day, as we all know, being both a holiday and a day of remembrance. So today's daf is dedicated to the memory of those who were tragically murdered 2 years ago. May our learning be an aliyah for their neshamot, a tribute to their lives and a reflection of the strength and resilience of our people in the face of the unimaginable pain we have all experienced since that day. And with that, wishing everyone also a Chag Sameach. Okay, we're going to get started with a review of the Mishnah. We saw in the Mishnah there was a machloket. Specifically, we're going to focus on the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbis about whether we, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you started with a machshava of chutz lizmano and then went to chutz l'mkamo, that will actually be pigul, because you started with a pigul machshava. According to the Rabbis, if you have a combo, even if you started with the pigul case, and then you went to chutz l'mkamo, outside the space, we're going to say the whole thing is disqualified for other reasons, and therefore it's not pigul, that you're going to have karet associated with it. So we saw at the end of yesterday's daf that Ilfa said machloket b'shtei avodot. The machloket is when you have the machshava in two avodot, meaning you started in one avodah, you did chutz lizmano. Then Rabbi Yehuda says, if you didn't do chutz lizmano in that avodah, but you did chutz lizmano in the you did chutz lizmano in the first avodah, you did a complete avodah with chutz lizmano, then you move to chutz l'mkamo, then we're going to have a machloket about it. But b'avodah achat, but if it all happened in one, while you were slaughtering, for example, it all happened then we're going to say, of course, even Rabbi Yehuda will think that's all together. In which case, once it's all together, the chutz l'mkamo really makes the chutz lizmano no longer pigul, that you're going to get karet for it. But Rabbi Yochanan said even b'avodah is a machloket. They actually argue in both cases. So now we're going to go through some issues with each of them. So since the first part was b'shtei avodot, the second part was, meaning the Mishnah gave the example of shachat, chutz lizmano, and then you moved the next one of the avodot to chutz l'mkamo, or the reverse. So the Mishnah was already talking about two avodot. So it makes sense that later when Rabbi Yehuda chimes in and says, by the way, I disagree with this, he was talking about two avodot. Ela Rabbi Yochanan, Reisha b'shtei avodot v'seifa avodah achat. You're going to say the Reisha is two avodot, and then you move in the seifa to even avodah achat. To which the Gemara says, yeah, that's not so complicated. In Reisha b'shtei avodot, seifa bein avodah achat, bein b'shtei avodot. Now, so the beginning starts out with two avodot, and then the next part is, right, Rabbi Yehuda comes and disagrees, both about one avodah and about two avodot. It's not so complicated. Okay, second question. This is going to be on Ilfa. Tanan, maybe not the strongest question either, although they are going to end in a kasha. Amar Rabbi Yehuda zehaklal. Now, Rabbi Yehuda starts off his words with zehaklal. If you notice, the Mishnah also started with it, right? This is the rule. Im machshevet hazman kadma l'machshevet hamakom, pigul v'chayvim alav karet. B'ishlamah l'Rabbi Yochanan, haynu dekatani zehaklal. Now, we always assume when it says this is the rule, it's coming to add something. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's coming to add, yeah, well, by the way, this isn't just in two avodot, it's also in one avodah. But Ela le'ilfa, my zaklal, but zaklal doesn't really come to include anything more additional than if Rabbi Yehuda just said it as is. So, kasha, this is in fact the difficulty. What are the words zaklal coming to add according to Ilfa? Okay, it's not a time. Now we're going to move to a different machloket in a Mishnah in Temurah, and from there we're going to relate this back possibly to our Mishnah. Tnanatam. Harezo tmurat ola tmurat shlamim. Now, just to review, Rabbi Yehuda basically goes by chutz lizmano. He says there's two ways to go with it. If you say it's two avodot, then basically you're going to say it was already done, the pigul, and therefore anything you do after, well, it's too late, it was already done. Or you say, if it was all in one avodah, and the machloket's even in one avodah, according to Rabbi Yochanan, then you're going to say, what Rabbi Yehuda is saying is tfos lashon rishon. When you say two contradictory things, we go by the first thing you said. So you said chutz lizmano and chutz l'mkamo. The chutz lizmano is the one that's relevant. We ignore what happens after that. That's if we say it's all in one avodah. So this concept of tfos lashon rishon comes up in a machloket with Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi. And we're going to see that Rabbi Meir seems to match Rabbi Yehuda, although we're going to see two explanations of this machloket. So it's not a time. It says in the Mishnah, Harezo tmurat ola, tmurat shlamim. You have three animals in front of you. One you designated for an ola, a burnt offering. One you designated for a peace offering. And the third, now you come and say, oh, this one is in place of my ola. And then you say that it's in place of my shlamim. Now, it can't be in place of both. So what did you mean? And what do we go by? According to Rabbi Meir, Harezo Tmurat Ola Divrei Rabbi Meir. What you said first is what matters. Okay, generally we understand Rabbi Meir's position as Tfos Lashon Rishon. You started off, although we will give an alternative explanation later, but we assume he's saying like Rabbi Yehuda. We go by the first thing you said. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda according to Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rabbi Yosi, Im lekach nitkaven tchila. If that's really what you meant at first, what Rabbi Yosi is going to say and how he exactly disagrees with Rabbi Meir is a bit of a debate. It's not so clear, but he says, if you really meant to say both. Now, what does it mean both? How could it be both? Well, it means half the animal, I'll use the value of it to replace the Ola offering, and half I'll use to replace the Shmini. Now, remember, Temurah doesn't work in the sense that you can't replace the other animal, but it does become sanctified and you have to bring it as a korban. Now, if you do a Temurah to a shlamim, it has to be brought as a shlamim. If you bring it as an ola, it has to be brought as an ola. Now, if we say that what you meant was to split the animal in half, you can't actually cut the animal in half and slaughter half for one and half for the other. So what would you have to do? You'd have to wait till it gets blemished, sell it, and take the money of half, right? Half by a shlamim, another animal for a shlamim, and half by an animal for an ola. So Rabbi Yosi says, it really depends. If you really meant both, okay, that you wanted it to be half-half. Look, there was no way you could say Ola and Shlamim in the same mouthful. You can't say two words at once. So we look at it as if you said them at once, and they both happen at the same time, and Dvarav Kayimim. And you can do half-half. And then you do what I said, wait till it gets a blemish, sell, and take the money and make Shlamim and an Ola with each of them. Ve'im mishamal harezo tmurat Ola, vinim lach v'amar harezo tmurat Shlamim. But if you were changing your mind, that's a different story. If you change your mind, there is no changing your mind. Once you did it Tmurat Ola, it's done. So even if you change your mind, it's too late. And then, Harezo Ola. Then it will be a Korban Ola. So now, Ibaylahu. Now they ask the question. Harezo Tmurat Ola Ushlamim Mahu. Instead of saying, now notice the wording. You said Harezo Tmurat Ola Tmurat Shlamim. That was the case we brought before. You said the word Tmurat twice. What if you didn't say Tmurat twice? You said Harezo Tmurat Ola Ushlamim. So what would be the case? Or, right, which sounds like you're grouping the two together, and you really meant to say them both at the same time. Would Rabbi Meir agree? Or lachatzot mahu, or you said, I want this animal to be half. Okay, Rashi says it like this: Harei behimazo lechatzota laola u'lishlamim. I want to split it for ola and shlamim. So, would we say that you really meant to split it, and there's no tfos l'sham rishon here, and Rabbi Meir would agree? So Abaye says, yeah, b'havadai Rabbi Meir. Of course, Rabbi Meir would agree in that case. Rava Amar Adayin Hi Machloket. No, Rabbi Meir would disagree in this case as well. So Amar Rava la Abaye. So Rava now goes to Abaye. That's the one that we're going to have a little difficulty understanding. In fact, if you look in Rashi, by the way, Rashi says, do we view this? I want to split it in two. Okay, either you say Ola and Shlamim, or you say I want to split it in half to Ola and Shlamim. Is echad diburahu ve'ein ze chal below zeh. And the dibur matchil zo tmurat olav ibaye lahu. Okay, I'm in the dibur matchil lachatzot mahu in the middle there. O Dilma, right? So it's chadibur, it's one speech, and enzo chalbelozo, one won't happen unless the other, because you're basically saying half this, half that. Or maybe kevan de pashta bapalga, but maybe you said I want half to be ola first. Now, once half of it's ola, the whole thing becomes ola, because each part of the body, right, is dependent on the other. You can't like just cut the animal in half and it won't survive. So one half follows the other half. So once the first half happened, if it happens first, the ola part, because you said it first, then it'll spread to the whole animal, and then you'll have a case where you already made it shlam ola, and you can't now turn it into a shlam. So that's really the question. So Rava says to Abaye, L'didach ta'amar b'hava daimo de Rabbi Meir. According to you, you said for sure Rabbi Meir agrees. Hare shchita dilchi lechatzot mi uplike. But in shchita, now if you do them both in the time of shchita, what do we learn? Shchita, we said they argue. Okay, now in shchita, it's like lechatzotami upligi. Okay, so now why is that? So, first of all, why is shchita like lechatzotami? So first of all, Rashi says, hare shchita. Now our Mishna says, let's talk about the shchita case. Where do we have it? Where do we have this split in a shchita case? Le'echol kezayit lemachal kezayit b'chutz. And that they have a debate about, because that's in the Mishna, and then Rabbi Yehuda comments. Now what's this case? You said, I want a kezayit to go. Right? While you're slaughtering, you say, I want to eat a kezayit tomorrow, I want to eat a kezayit outside. And Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. So that's the shchita case. While you're slaughtering, you say, I want a kezayit of this and a kezayit of that. Now, why is this the same as lechatzot? Because l'chatzot is saying, it's not saying I want to do one and then I cancel it, I want to do the other. No, I'm doing half this way, half that way. And when I say I want a kazayit of the meat to go here and a kazayit, right, to be tomorrow, and I want a kazayit of the meat to go outside, well, obviously there's more than one kazayit in an animal. So I can easily split those up. So it's not like one is contradicting the other and we have to say, well, what do we go by? But it seems, so now we have a parallel case to lechatzot, and we see they disagree. So Rava says to Abaye, there's your proof that you're wrong, because here they disagree, and it's just like splitting it in half. Because again, you can put this one there and that one there, and there's enough to share around that they're not contradicting. Amar le, so Abaye answers him back. Misavart eina l'shchita ela levasof. Why are you assuming that when we're talking about shchita, that we're basically saying, right, the shchita takes, it's 2 simanim. You have to cut the trachea and the esophagus. So if, when you're doing shchita, you're saying that the shchita action is kind of only happening at the end. And in the end, you have these 2 things you talked about during the shchita process. But it's not true that the shchita only, like when you finish the 2 simanim, that's when we call it shchita. No, yeshna the shchita mitchila v'ad sof. There's process in the shchita. You start by 1 siman, then you continue with the 2nd siman, and each one is significant in and of itself. And Rashi points out there's this concept called mifaglim bechatzi matir. You can have a pigul action in half of a matir, meaning in an element of shchita, like half the shchita, which is slaughtering 1 siman. If while you're slaughtering one of the parts, either the esophagus or the trachea, you have a pigul machshava, that makes it pigul, even though it's only in part of the shchita. So that's because yeshem shchita b'tchilat sof, it starts from the very beginning. We call that shchita right away. And Mishnatenu, the case in our Mishnah where it's kazayit chutz lizmano and kazayit chutz l'mkomo, right? Kazayit tomorrow I'll eat, and tomorrow and a kazayit I'm gonna do outside the place. That's the amar siman rishon chutz lizmano and siman sheni chutz l'mkomo. You could explain the machloket in the Mishnah. Abaye says as each one happened in a different part of the shchita. So that means that already when you did chutz lizmano, that was like a complete action. Even though it wasn't, it was a half an action, but you can have pigul in a half an action. So that was already a done deal. It's already pigul, and only after you did chutz l'mkomo, that's irrelevant because it's already pigul. It's too late to change it. But that's only because you could split shchita in half. But if it was all in one action, that wouldn't be the case. And, right, maybe they wouldn't argue, and that's what Abaye was trying to say. If you said it all at once, right, where you could do half-half, like the lechatzot, or like the shchita, then maybe Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't disagree. So that would match Abaye. So now they bring another question on Abaye. What about kmitza? If I take the kmitza, and while I'm taking the kmitza out, right, I put my fingers in the dough, the Kohen does that, and he has this machshava that he's going to eat, he's going to burn half of it on the altar tomorrow, and burn half of it outside the place. That's like lechatzot. Because he could say, or a kazayit of it, right? He could say, I'm doing 1 kazayit tomorrow and 1 kazayit outside this place. And that could be split. And they argue in that case. How do we know they argue? Because it's a Mishnah, minachot. Okay, it comes up in minachot that they argue about this. And there you can't say there's 2 different parts of the process in the comments. Because there is no process there. It's one action. It's not like 2 simanim of slaughtering. So hatamnami de amar kometz mincha chutz lizmano, kometz levona chutz l'mkomo. So they find a case. Because the kometz has 2 different elements to it. In a mincha offering, many of the mincha offerings, not all of them, besides bringing this mincha, this meal offering of fine flour mixed with oil, they also put frankincense. And you also take a kometz of the frankincense. Okay, you put frankincense in a bowl and then take out a few fingers full. So now we have the case where we're going to say in kmitza, maybe the case they argue, is again where there's 2 actions. He did the kometz of the mincha and had a thought, I'm going to do it outside the time. I'm going to burn it on the altar outside the time. And then he said, I'm going to take a kometz of levona and I'm going to burn it outside the azara. And then we could have a parallel case and say that maybe is the case they're arguing about, but they don't really argue in the case where there was just one action supporting Abaye. But they said, but the comments of the mincha of a sinner, that's the sliding scale offering when you bring a mincha, if you don't have enough money, there is no levona. And there, they also have a machloket. Now, how do we know they also have a machloket? We don't really. We just assume. So, one possible answer is lo pligi. They don't argue in that case. A second possible answer is Amar Rav Ashi, Imtim Salom or Pligi. If you want to say they do argue in that case, I'll find you a case. Pligi b'psiot. Just like slaughtering has different parts, every step you take of bringing the mincha to the altar is also considered an action. So if in each step he had a different thought, first chutz lizmano, we can say that's a chatzi matir, mafaglim v'chatzi matir. We make a pigul from half an action, and then when you did the next step for chutz l'mkomo, it's too late because it's already pigul. So that's another way to resolve this difficulty against Abaye. And now we just end the section by Rav Shimi bar Ashi matne kid Abaye and Rav Yehuda bar Nata matne kid Rava. Okay, so Rav Shimi bar Ashi rules like Abaye, that basically we're going to view this Ola and Shlamim as one dibur, okay, and Rabbi Meir would agree, right, and the Temurah Ola Ushlamim or Lechatzot, right, that Rabbi Meir would agree that there's no machloket, Rabbi Meir would agree with Rabbi Yosi that we're going to view this as one dibur, okay, and he doesn't disagree. And according to Rava, he does disagree in this case as well. Okay, we view this as two separate things because, right, even though it's one dibur, right, we said the Ola kicks in first and then it spreads to the whole animal and then you can't do shlamim anymore. Okay, now we're going to continue along the issue of Rabbi Meir, and if you notice before we compare Rabbi Meir to Rabbi Yehuda, and that's going to come from what Rav Dimi said, but we're going to see that Abaye disagrees. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Meir b'shitat Rabbi Yehuda amra. Okay, when Rav Dimi came from Israel to Babylonia, he said Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda really were in the same boat. They both said Tfos l'sham rishon, we go by the first thing you say. Now, Amra, right, okay, so he said, Amar Tfos l'sham rishon. Okay, how do we know this? Ditnan, it says in the Mishnah, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Zaklal, im machshevet hazman, kedma machshevet hamakom, pigul v'chayavim alav karei. We go by the first thing you say, Tfos l'sham rishon, and that matches Rabbi Meir. Turning now to Amud Bet, Amar le Abaye, he says, what are you talking about? V'ham Rabbi bar Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, ki magat lehu, Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yosi b'hadi adati lo pligi. If you look and you try to put Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi together, you're going to see that they don't really disagree. Okay, now we're going to go back and try to re-explain this machlokah of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi. We thought before that the machlokah was Rabbi Meir says Tfos l'sham rishon, and Rabbi Yosi says no. Potentially, you can look at it if the person really meant to say both at the same time. It doesn't matter that they first said Ola and that came out of their mouths first. No, we say we're going to view it as if he meant to say them both at the same time, right? Only if it's clear that he changed his mind, that's a different story. But now we're going to understand this a little bit differently. So first of all, the Gemara says the lo pligi, v'hamifla pligi. How can you possibly say they don't argue? They clearly argue. We brought them as two different opinions. So Amarle, a very interesting line. You could call this very deep, or I don't know, maybe not deep at all. Pligi b'mai de pligi, but lo pligi b'mai de lo pligi. They disagree about what they disagree about. They don't disagree about what they don't disagree about. Okay. In other words, what they're really trying to say is they're closer than you thought. And they don't have this big debate about Tfos l'sham rishon or not. Why? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, hakol modim. They all agree. Now we're going to see they all agree in this case, they all agree in another case, and then they disagree about one particular case. And then we'll see that we're going to narrow their machloket. Hakol modim hechad amal tachol zo va'achar kach tachol zo tivrei hakol lo chayla. They both agree, and that's clear from the end of Rabbi Yosi, that if they said I want it to be Ola, and then you say, oh, I changed my mind, I want it to be Shlamim, or I want Shlamim to kick in after the Ola kicks in, for sure, just the Ola kicks in, and there's nothing after that, because once it sanctifies an Ola, you can't sanctify it as Shlamim. And they both agree, Lo tachul zo elen ken chalazo, if you depend them one on the other. This is not going to be an Ola, until, right, a Temurah of an Ola, until it also becomes a Temurah of a Shlamim. Then you're clearly depending one on the other, and they're both going to kick in at the same time. And then when they kick in at the same time, half the animal is going to be a Temurah for an Ola, half will be a Temurah for a Shlamim, and then again you'll have to wait till the animal gets a blemish, sell it, take the money, go buy new animals, 2 animals, and sacrifice them. They all agree about that. Ki pligi da amar tmurat ola tmurat shlamim, which was the case we saw, but now we're going to say the machlokah is very specific. Rabbi Meir sabal. Now the whole question is going to be, why did you say tmurat ola ushlamim? Why did you say tmurat ola tmurat shlamim? Why did you say it twice? So Rabbi Meir holds midahavale lemeimar tmurat ola ushlamim. You should have said ola and shlamim if you wanted both, and instead amar tmurat ola tmurat shlamim. But instead you said I want this tmurah of an ola and then tmurah of a shlamim. Shma mina mahadar kahadar be. It must be you changed your mind. So Rabbi Meir views this as a change of mind, not Tfos l'sham rishon. He views it the way Rabbi Yosi said at the end, that if you change your mind, well, it's too late. You can't. Once you say Tmurat Olah, it's a done deal. So he agrees conceptually with him. The difference is, why did you say Temurat Olah Temurat Shlamim? Rabbi Meir says it must be you change your mind. Rabbi Yosi has a different way of viewing it. Rabbi Yosi says, Iyamar Temurat Olah Ushlamim. If you said Temurat Olah Ushlamim, I would have thought, just like Rabbi Meir thought, Hava Mina Palga Temurat Olah Palga Temurat Shlamim. I would have thought you meant half you wanted to be the Olah, half the animal you wanted to be a Shlamim. But Lahachi Amar Temurat Olah Temurat Shlamim. What did you try to say when you did Temurat Olah Temurat Shlamim instead of saying Temurat Olah and Shlamim? Lememra dekula Olah v'kula Shlamim Havi. What you really tried to say is, and you can't do this, but what you were trying to say is, I want the whole animal to be an Olah, a Temurah for the Olah, and I want the whole animal to be a Temurah for the Shlamim. Now you can't really do that, but you thought maybe you could somehow do that. You wanted it to kind of cover both. So, since you can't do that, the only thing you could do is split it 50-50. Okay, but you thought. So in the end, again, Rabbi Meir is going to say, the reason why you said it, again, was you must have changed your mind. Change of mind means it's Olah. But if you were really trying to make both, right, Temurat Olah, Temurat Shlamim, Rabbi Yosi says you're actually trying to make the whole thing an Olah and the whole thing a Shlamim, and that's why you use the word Temurah twice. And in that case, what we do is, right, you're going to basically make half-half, because you can't make the whole thing. So if both are going to kick in at once, well, it's going to be half-half. Okay, and that's their one particular disagreement. But it doesn't have to do with Tfos Lashon Rishon at all. And then Rabbi Meir doesn't match Rabbi Yehuda, and that's how Abaye explains it. So now, what does Rav Dimi respond? Amar lei, hu amar lo pligi, v'anamina pligi. Okay, you're quoting me Rabbi Bar Bar Chan in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, who said they don't argue, but I think they do. I have a different way of viewing this. And you can have your way, you go with Rabbi Yochanan, I have my way. And that's how we end up with two different interpretations of this machloket. Amar Ula v'item Rav Oshaya. Now we're going to have a question about the nusach in the Mishna, and this is going to have certain relevance. It's similar to what we were just talking about. So either Ula said it or Rav Oshaya. Efshar yandin chavre bavlai kazayit tnan or kazayit bikazayit tnan. So he says, is it possible my Babylonian friends know whether the Mishnah is a case of kazayit without a vav in between, which is actually the way it appears. Okay, in our Mishnah it said lechol kazayit b'chutz kazayit lemachal. Okay, where you said I want to eat a kazayit of it outside, a kazayit of it tomorrow, kazayit tomorrow, kazayit outside. Or is it kazayit tomorrow and a kazayit outside? Is there a vav there? Why is the vav important? Because a vav is a connector word. Just like we said before, ola ushlamim. If you say the vav, we're going to connect them. And then, if the wording of the Mishnah is kazayit, the way it appears by us, then we're going to say they have a machloket. But it could be, Rabbi Yehuda would agree in kazayit v'kazayit, that it's going to be, actually, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's going to agree with Tanakama that it's all just one lump, which means we're not going to call this pigul because it also has chutz l'mkomo, right, outside its location. So that's the question. If we say it's kazayit b'kazayit, then even in kazayit b'kazayit, Rabbi Yehuda is going to disagree, and obviously in kazayit. So let's read it inside. Kazayit t'nan or kazayit b'kazayit t'nan. Now here they're going to go through the possibilities. If you say kazayit t'nan without an end in between them, aval, then what would you say about kazayit v'kazayit divrei hakol erub machshavot havi? Everyone's going to agree that that's two machshavot that get combined together, and then there's no pigul. Or Dilma, or a second side of the argument is kazayit kazayit t'nan dil Rabbi Yehuda partahave. Maybe it is kazayit and kazayit, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, that's pratim. That's two separate things. And then if zmano came first, the time, then we're going to call that pigul. V'kosh ken kazayit v'kazayit, and then obviously kazayit v'kazayit. That was just a repeat of what I said before. I read it inside. Now we're going to try to learn the answer to this question we're going to have a whole story here. Tashma, we're going to learn it from here. Debai minei Levi mi Rebbe. Levi asked Rebbe the following question. Chishev le'echol kazayit lemachal b'chutz mahu. Levi asked Rebbe, if you had an intent to eat the kazayit of the meat tomorrow outside, what is that? Now if we do levels here, kazayit is the least likely to put them together because there's no connector word, there's no anything. And you say kazayit of this, kazayit that. You really separate them. Kazayit and kazayit is already, sounds like they're possibly together, and that's the whole question. If we go to the next level, we get to kazayit tomorrow outside. Now that's all one statement really, right? Very similar to what we had before about the ola and shlamim. So he asked about that third case. So what did he answer him? Amar le zo she'ela. That's a good question. And the answer is Eruv Machshavot Havi. Even Rabbi Yehuda views this as one case. So Rabbi Yehuda is going to say, if you said, I'm going to eat a kazayit tomorrow outside, that's not pikul, because you combine the statement. Amar lefanav Rabbi Shimon b'Rebbe. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Rebbe, hears this and says to Rebbe, Lo mishnatenu, I don't understand. Isn't that obvious from our Mishnah? Because our Mishnah talks about lechol kazayit b'chutz, kazayit machal, kazayit lemachar, kazayit b'chutz, kachatzi zayit b'chutz, kachatzi zayit lemachar, kachatzi zayit lemachar, kachatzi zayit b'chutz, right? All those cases. Pasul ve'im bo karet. Now, ha'idach, whatever's not mentioned in the Mishnah then, would be eruv machshavot havi. Since our Mishnah doesn't discuss that case, it's pretty obvious that that's the case they argue about. But anything else would be eruv machshavot. So I understand why you said, oh, what a good question. So Amar le, Rebbe says to him, Hu sha'al bidvar chochma va'at amart mishnatenu. He says, he asked me a very good question, and why are you saying, oh, it's so clear from our Mishnah? And I'll explain to you why his question was a good question. We're going to learn now, and it's a little bit confusing here. But Rebbe taught the Mishnah in two different versions to Levi and to his other students. Okay? Now, he says the following. Lididach, to you, da'adnitech tarte lo kashelach. I taught you kazayit, kazayit, and kazayit, vikazayit. In other words, my version of the Mishnah was kazayit, vikazayit that I taught you. And therefore, and kazayit, kazayit, I taught it to you in both ways. So you knew that case 1 and case 2, there's a machloket. And from there, it's obvious that in case 3, that I didn't mention, obviously there's no machloket and everyone agrees. So to you, it's very obvious. But lidide, to him, de lo anie elachada, I only taught him one version. Okay? Visham'inu l'rabanan de kagarse tarti. Now, I only taught him, which one? Kazayit, kazayit. Now, so I taught him case 1, and he's asking about case 3. Now, why was he asking about case 3? Well, he heard that I taught the rabbis too. Okay? So now, let's think of the logic. He said, Visavar, Levi must have thought, Didi dafka, viditu eruv machshavot have. Either mine is dafka, just one, and the case that Rebbe taught them of kazayit, vikazayit, Rabbi Yehuda would agree, actually. In other words, let's go with my version. Only kazayit, kazayit is clearly separate, right? The Rabbi Yehuda thinks it's separate. But once you say and, it's eruv machshavot. O dilma didhu dafka, or maybe theirs is right, that it's kazayit, kazayit, and kazayit, vikazayit. And then, now here's the jump. Uladidi shirei shirli. Now, when Rebbe taught me the Mishnah, then he left out one case. If that's the case, if he left off a case for me, maybe midashir li lididi, midashir li lididi ha, shir luhu liditu nami bahach. If he left out one case for me, maybe he taught them 2 cases and left out case number 3 for them. So if we go by their version and the fact that Rebbe left out one for me, maybe he left out one for them, and maybe that 3rd case should also be included. Okay, it's an interesting kind of logic that Rebbe comes up with for what Levi was thinking. Now, I kind of not messed this up for you, but I kind of gave away the next line because in the way the Gemara says it, he just says, he taught them one case and he taught me 2 cases. It didn't say which cases he taught Levi. Okay? But which was the one case? So now the Gemara is going to say, now it's obvious which one, because obviously we taught him only one. You didn't know what was the other cases. It was obviously the kazayit, kazayit. So that's what they're going to prove right now. Hey, Idniye, which was the one he taught Levi? By the way, I'll just already tell you, from here it's clear that since Rebbe taught the version to the others of kazayit, vikazayit, and that was to what he taught to many of the rabbis, that must be the right version, and that's our answer. But now we're just going to say, which one did he teach them? Which one did he teach Levi? Which was the one? If he taught him the middle case, then he didn't really leave anything out, because kazayit implies kazayit also. Kazayit vikazayit, Rabbi Yehuda looked at as 2 different cases. Of course, if there was no end in between, of course they're going to be looked at as 2 cases. Ella, so it must be kazayit itniye, that what he really taught him was kazayit, and what Levi was really trying to get at was tibayle kazayit vikazayit. He really wanted to know what's the halacha for kazayit vikazayit. Now, if that was really what he wanted to know, why did he ask about kazayit lemachal bachutz? So Abaye mine chada desham'inan tarte. He asked about the case 3. Okay, he knew case 1. He knew case 1 was a machloket. He wanted to know, after he heard that Rebbe taught the rabbis kazayit vikazayit, what he really wanted to know is that the right nusach or is mine? And is kazayit vikazayit really a machloket or not? So what did he do? He asked case 3. And from case 3, he'll figure out what case 2 is. Because inan kazayit v'kazayit. Right, now we're going to say it like this. He figures once they get the answer for that, okay, so if, let's say, they don't argue in the case of, if they argue in that case, well, okay, we'll see it like this in a minute. So he figured if he asked about that third case, it would be obvious to him what the second case is. Now, this is a little confusing. That's why I want to wait a minute, because it's not exactly so clear how we'll get to the answer. But we're going to read it now. Now, if he just asked about kazayit v'kazayit, he wouldn't know what the case is with kazayit l'machar b'chutz. Why? Well, it depends. It would work. If he says, oh, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree about case 2, right? Case 1, kazayit, he disagrees. He thinks they're two separate. Case 2, they all agree that it's together, right? And therefore, there's not going to be pigul here. Obviously, in case 3, right, if in case kazayit and kazayit, then obviously in case 3, kazayit tomorrow outside is clearly going to be all combined according to Rabbi Yehuda. And obviously according to the rabbis, they think anyway. But if about case 2, they said, oh, this is a machloket. So there's a machloket in case 1, there's a machloket in case 2. That doesn't help you about case 3. They might also disagree in case 3. So akati kazayit l'machar b'chutz kamebayle. He wouldn't get an answer to that. And that's why I asked about case 3, because then he'd understand about all 3, or all 2. Because case 1, obviously, we know. So the Gemara says, that's not really true, though, and that's why I waited for this, because it's not exactly the case. Depends what he answered. Ihachi hashtanami. Also, you could say the same thing with case number 3. It won't necessarily be clear. It depends what the answer is. It would work. If he said, Rabbi Yehuda thinks they disagree about that case as well, case 3, well then, and they disagree about case 1, then obviously it's clear about case 2, right? Koshken kazayit v'kazayit. But ela iamart le klala. But if he said, which is actually what he did say, then it's a klala, that even that case, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree. He thinks it's all one, right? Even in that case, he agrees with the rabbis that we're going to view this all as one, and there won't be pigul here, even if you started with chutz l'zmano. But in kazayit, yes. What about kazayit v'kazayit? We don't know, right? In kazayit, he'll disagree. Case number 1, he'll disagree. Case number 3, he'll agree with the rabbis. What about akati kazayit or kazayit, the baile? We still don't have an answer about kazayit v'kazayit. So the Gemara answers will go a bit into tomorrow's daf. Im kain mirtach ratach. He says, well, if kazayit v'kazayit also was the same as machar b'chutz, okay, that it's going to be, obviously Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree, then he would get very angry at me. If I ask a question about case 3, and case 2 already, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't disagree with the rabbis, he'll get angry with me. He'll say, Hashta kazayit u kazayit klala. Already in kazayit v'kazayit, we view that as one case. Kazayit l'machar b'chutz mebay, you're asking a question about case 3. And that's why, when he answered him, and he said, what a good question, it's because he holds that Rabbi Yehuda, and that proves the nusach again, that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees also in kazayit v'kazayit, and that's why case 3 was a good question, because if they disagree in case 1 and 2, well, what about case 3? And the answer is that Rabbi said, oh, they don't disagree, that Rabbi Yehuda would agree with the rabbis, that we view that all as one lump statement, in which case, chutz l'zmano is not going to create a people situation, because you had a chutz l'mkomo. Okay, so that was all a long-winded way to get to the nusach in the Mishnah, according to Rabbi, was kazayit v'kazayit. Remember, Rabbi is the one who put together the Mishnah, so he's the best person to ask. Okay, so again, now we're going to review our daf. We started with this machlok at Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis, which we really dealt with the entire time. Ilfa said the machlok is in shtei avodot. Rabbi Yochanan said it's even in avodah achat, right? Even within the same avodah, we can say Rabbi Yehuda is going to think zmano comes before makomo. It's going to be, it's going to make it pigul, even though they're in the same avodah, right? This whole thing is how far do we take Rabbi Yehuda, both there and at the end of our daf as well. And then we had a question for each one of them. One we resolved, one we didn't. Then we had a Mishnah in Temurah, machloket Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi. Is Rabbi Meir like Rabbi Yehuda? Rabbi Dimi thought so. Abaye didn't think so. Rabbi Dimi thought that, Abaye thought that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yosi actually were much more similar than we thought they were, and it's not all about Tvos Lashon Rishon. And then we got to this last thing about what's the nusach of the Mishnah and what are the ramifications for this third case. I mean, that wasn't really the question, but that was a question that kind of an outgrowth of that sugya, that really we just brought that whole question to answer what was the real nusach in the Mishnah. To the end, it's kazaya vikazaya, which obviously includes kazaya. And that they argue about both those cases, but they don't apparently disagree about kazaya l'machar b'chutz. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a chag sameach and a meaningful day.